All right, good day, hi, and welcome. Okay, so fingerboard radius, that's the topic of today. So what I got here is the Mighty 8 string LTD EC258, circa 2022. My venerable, probably best playing guitar on the planet, SG3, circa 2006. And of course, circa 2022. Did I buy it this year or last year? When did I buy it? No, I did buy that last year. So 2022, my Jackson RR5T Randy Rhoads Flying V. The hooligan of the bunch, of course. That guitar makes me laugh every time I play it. It's so good. So I just did a video on the neck profiles and, slippery versus the actual profile. You can go check that video out, those videos out. I don't do a lot of fancy editing. I just basically talk about the meat and potatoes of the topic. But a topic that some guitar players might not understand or ever consider when they're buying a guitar is the actual fingerboard radius. So we've talked about scale length, we've talked about neck profile, but what about what is this radius thing? Well, on modern guitars, the fingerboards are getting flatter. To give you an idea, like this Mark Holcomb guitar here is a 20-degree radius. So if you were looking at it, it'd be like this, right? The Gibsons, I forget, I think they're a 16-degree radius the whole way, which is kind of like this, right? And then this is a compound radius of 14 to 16. So rounder up at the top, flatter at the bottom. So kind of gives you the best of both worlds. So you say, well, isn't flatter just better? Not necessarily. Let's say you're talking about a 1972 Telecaster. That thing's probably got a 12-degree radius. The thing's like, it's almost like playing a pipe, So why would you want a rounder fretboard radius, and why would you want a flatter fretboard radius? Well, the flat one's the obvious one because when we're talking modern guitar players, we're typically talking like blinding, flashing speed solos, right? So I remember I played a 72 Telecaster one time, and it was like, it literally felt like I was playing a pipe, like there was such a round radius on it. But boy, did that thing ever chord nicely. It was really, really nice for chords. It was better than probably, most modern guitars for playing chords. It was just really easy to do. It was really a natural feel for doing chords. But man, when you went to shred, it was just like string bends were just kind of like out of the question. You could bend a little bit, you would just fret out each right away. So the thing is, with the more radius you have, typically the more relaxed and easier it is to play. But when you want to do vibrato, your radius actually takes your note and kind of kills it as you start going up. It'll fret, what they call a fret out, where it's like, and it just this kind of note just dies off, right? But when it's flat, you can kind of stretch it around the planet. It doesn't matter. However, you might have to work a little harder for other things to get those notes really, really clear. Because when you have a flatter fingerboard, you going from like the compound radius, like the Jacksons and Ibanez's and stuff like that, and even the Gibsons, which is same radius the whole way, pretty much. What I noticed was when I went to the 20-degree radius is that I really had to flatten out my fingers. Which is a lot more work. So even on something like this, which doesn't take long to get used to, but you do notice it where it's like you're doing like a bar chord and you start to hear like a fret buzz. It's like, where's that coming from? Oh, it's not the guitar, it's you. So flatter is a little more work because you have to actually really flatten out your fingers, right? So technique comes really into play then. So in other words, I'm not saying it's harder to play, but it's there's more work you have to do. So the more round you have on your radius you have on your fretboard, you can kind of just lazy it, like the Jimi Hendrix kind of, just let your fingers just flap over the fingerboard, and you can, hit like, kind of bar chord everything, bar chord kind of, like two strings at a time for your solos and stuff like that. And it's really easy to play, but you'll lose out when you go to shred. So that's why you're seeing guitars becoming more flat on the radius, especially for metal guitar players and rock guitar players, hard rock guitar players. They tend to want to be able to, really stretch those notes, really get as much as they can out of a note when they're doing a vibrato. Especially if it's like think like a Stevie Ray Vaughan type of player where like Stevie Ray Vaughan tries to take the E string, tries to make the two E strings touch each other, right? So, um, but there a compromise radius like where, okay, maybe you don't want the 20-degree radius fretboards because you're not doing that kind of shredding, and when you're playing chords, you really want those chord voicings to be as smooth as possible. So you don't want to be kind of sound like you're misfretting a finger, like a chord. And it on the simple chords like your first position chords, it's usually not a problem. But when you start getting into those really suspended stretched out chords like 9 chords and 11s and 13 chords and like that's I call them the Andy Summers chords. They're like big jazz chords, right? That's when you find that the flat fingerboards kind of work against you a bit. You say, yeah, but I'm a metal player, blah, blah, blah. But even the metal players play clean. If you take a guy like Mark Holcomb, I mean, again, I'm not the biggest Periphery fan, but I do have 2 of his guitars because I'm a big fan of his guitars. This guitar is not too bad to play chords on, but I find I get a little bit more. I have to watch where my fingers are in relative to the neighboring string with the flatter fingerboards, where I find what happens is if you don't quite have your fingers up enough, your finger touches the next string and you get that kind of like, it's not a harmonic, but just like a string that should be ringing out full. You're kind of like just kind of brushing up against it and stuff like that. Whereas on a slightly more radius, I tend to not get that. And I had a 1968 Harmony Rocket. It was my first electric guitar, and that thing, I swear, was just it was like a log. It was like a Rickenbacker neck. It was like the same. The nut and the nut and the heel of the fretboard was exactly the same the whole way. It was a straight fretboard. I'd never seen a guitar like that before. But this is a 1968 guitar, so and it was a really tight neck. The best to play chords on if you were a jazz guy. This was kind of like an ES335 kind of knockoff of the time, a hollow body, and think Chuck Berry, that type of thing. But that neck was the best for chords. But it was so tight to play any sort of leads on. But you could chord like like I say, you could do these insane chords, right? And a lot of it had to do with just the way that radius was on the fret. It was the most radius I've ever had on any guitar I've ever owned. Like you could literally put it down, you could see the frets, like a little bridge kind of thing. But yes, there is compromise. Most of your Fenders and Gibson style guitars have that kind of best of both worlds, like the SG3, where it chords well enough, but yet it's not so round that it restricts you when you shred. So guitars now are more scientific, in how they're designed. Like they really have kind of take guitars to a whole new level. But that's a whole new experience. Now, what you typically get is guys that are a lot older, say in their 60s. I'm in my 50s, but guys in their 60s and stuff like that, they tend to not like the newer guitars. They're like, I can't play this fingerboard. It's too flat. It doesn't have feel. You always get that. That's usually what it is. And they are correct. It's a different feel. But for me, I'd rather work a little harder and have more versatility, but you have to work a little harder, and harder means less smooth. Less smooth means it sounds, it's kind of like when you got somebody who's been playing a guitar for a year, how rough they play their chord changes in comparison to somebody who's been playing for 10 years, right? And oh wow, it's raining. Yeah, that's why I'm making these videos. It's just been raining all week. So yeah, there is many reasons for compound radius, like I say, if you take like this guitar where it's basically 20-degree radius the whole way, when you get down, like when you're up here at, in the higher frets, it's no problem. Same on this guitar. But then when you're down at in the first, say, from fret 1 to 5 type of thing, you find, like I say, you have to really work to get those chords to sound smooth, right? Where with a little bit more radius on that end, like on the Jackson, you could still get relatively, your C, D, G, and E kind of chords still sound, like E flat or whatever. They still sound clean, reasonable, whatever. And then with the compound radius, the advantage you get is it gets flatter as you go up, where you're more likely to be doing soloing rather than chords. And because your frets get closer together, you can actually, you're not stretching as much, so you can, work out the smoothness on that. So that is probably the best compromise fingerboards you can get, is something with a compound radius. Jackson does it, Charvel does it, because Jackson and Charvel are basically both owned by Fender. Fender, I don't know if they do it on their FM series Strats, but I think all their other Strats are pretty much like Gibson. It's, what you got at the top is what you got at the bottom. But I do think compound radius is probably going to be the wave of the future. But then again, for the metalhead guys, I think we're all going to be going to the, really digging the 20-degree fretboards. Again, very flat, a little harder work. For a beginner, what would I recommend? Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. You're a beginner. You know what I mean? Doesn't matter. Whatever you start with, right? That's what you're gonna, just focus on playing well. But if you wanted something that was going to be easier to learn on, the more radius is easy to learn on for your chords,